when your father called it the truth, and why it was never about you. So, in your childhood, at some point, you just stopped arguing back. Maybe you were 7, maybe you were 14, maybe you were sitting at the dinner table or in the car or standing in the kitchen doorway, and something in you just gave up. And you said it out loud or just inside yourself in that voice that had started to sound uncomfortably like his. Fine, you're right, I'm an idiot. And the terrible thing, the thing that takes years to understand, is that in that moment, it felt like clarity, like you had finally stopped fighting something true. The exhausting work of believing in yourself had just been too much, and this was easier. This was rest. It was not rest, it was collapse. And there's a profound difference between the two. This video is about what happens to a child who is raised inside constant criticism, name-calling, blame, and humiliation by a parent who genuinely believed he was helping, who wanted you to succeed, who would tell you hand on heart that he never called you stupid. He said your behavior was stupid, which is completely different, which you would understand if you weren't so sensitive. It is about what that does to yourself, and it is about how you find your way back to who you actually are, separate from every verdict he ever delivered about you. Let's talk about the father who wanted you to succeed and did the opposite. Let me describe this father carefully because he is not simple. He's not indifferent. Indifference would almost be easier to metabolize because at least indifference does not pretend to be love. This father cares. He cares intensely. He has a vision of what you should become, how you should perform, how you should think, how you should move through the world. And that vision is real to him. He's not lying when he says he wants the best for you. He means with his whole chest, but he has no tools. He has no emotion regulation, no understanding of child development, no framework for the difference between pushing someone toward their potential and dismantling the very foundation from which potential actually grows. So what comes out again and again is this criticism delivered as truth and humiliation delivered as honesty. He says things like, I'm not going to lie to you just to make you feel good. He says, someone has to tell you the truth. He says, I'm harder on you because I believe in you more. He says, your behavior was stupid. I didn't say you were stupid. Learn the difference. And that last distinction, the behavior versus the person, is one he genuinely believes protects you. He has constructed an internal logic in which criticizing what you do is different from criticizing what you are. And in theory, he's not entirely wrong. That distinction does exist and it matters. But here's what he does not understand and what developmental psychology is about. A child does not have the cognitive or emotional ability, architecture to separate herself from her behavior. Not in the early years, not in the way that father imagines. Because when you're small and the person you depend on most looks at something you did and calls it stupid, your nervous system does not receive a nuanced critique of a discrete behavioral choice. It receives a verdict about your worth. The message that lands is not your drawing was bad. It is you are the kind of person who produces bad things. He was teaching you to succeed. He was teaching you at the same time and in the same breath that you were fundamentally defective. And those two things lived inside you simultaneously, pulling in opposite directions for years. And then there was your mother. She saw what was happening, she felt it, in the way the air changed when he started, in the way your face changed, in the way you got smaller and quieter and more careful. She tried to step between you and it, and she said, that's enough. She said, leave them alone. She said, in those moments when she couldn't find the words, that you don't have to talk to them like that. And he turned to her, and this is the sentence I want to sit with for a moment, because it is one of the most quietly devastating sentences a parent can say. He turned to her and said, why are you always his advocate? Why are you always defending him? He needs to know the truth. You're not doing him any favors. That sentence did several things at once. It reframed her protection of you as a failure of parenting. It positioned his cruelty as clarity and your mom's kindness as weakness. It isolated her, made her advocacy feel like a character flaw, like she was the problem. She was raising someone soft and unprepared for the world. And at the same time, it put her in an impossible position because she could see what his words were doing to you. And she also lived inside a relationship with him. And the energy required to fight every battle, to stand between you and his contempt every single time, was more than any one person could sustain forever. So sometimes she did step back, not because she stopped caring, of course, but she was exhausted. She had her own wounds, her own fears, her own limitations. She was trying to hold the family together with tools that were not equal to the task. And in those moments when she stepped back, when the criticism landed without anyone between you and it, you were alone in a way that had a particular texture. Because you had seen that protection was possible, you had felt it, and then it was gone. That intermittent protection, well intentioned and real but inconsistent, is its own kind of complicated. You love her for trying, you at the same time you carry somewhere grief for the times the trying was not enough. Here's what years of this particular kind of parenting builds inside a person. It builds a critic who never clocks out. Not his voice exactly, though sometimes it might sound like his, but an internalized voice constructed from thousands of moments of being told you were not enough, that knows your specific soft spots with surgical precision, that wakes up before you do, that is already running assessments by the time you open your eyes in the morning. From a schema therapy perspective, what develops is what we call the defectiveness schema, a deep, unconscious belief that there is something fundamentally wrong with you, something that, if seen clearly by others, would result in rejection, something that all the achievement, all the effort, all the careful performance of competence cannot fully cover. And alongside it, almost always, there's this unrelenting standard schema. Because if you're defective, the only solution is to be perfect, to work hard enough, achieve enough, improve enough, so that defectiveness never becomes visible. The thing he saw in you, so that the thing he saw in you stays hidden. This is exhausting in a way that is difficult to describe to someone who has not lived it, because it is not the exhaustion of doing too much. It is the exhaustion of being at war with yourself, of having one part of you that is trying to live and build and connect and create, and another part that is auditing everything in real time, looking for evidence that he was right. And then there's what happens in moments of failure, like ordinary human failure, a mistake at work, misunderstanding in a relationship, some decision that did not go the way that you hoped it will go. For someone without this history, failure is disappointing, but it's information, something to learn from and move on. For the child who was raised inside that voice, failure is confirmation. It is the moment the internal critic points to the evidence and says, see, he was right. You're exactly what he said you were. That is the moment you said it at the table. Fine, I'm an idiot. That was not clarity. That was a child who had been worn down past the point of resistance, who had found in surrender something that felt like relief, but was actually the beginning of a much longer loss. Now, why everything he said about you, why everything negative he said about you was a lie? I want to say something plainly without softening it into clinical language. Everything he told you about who you are was not the truth about you. It was the truth about him. A parent with genuine emotional regulation, a parent who actually understood what they were doing when they raised a child, does not call their child's behavior stupid at the dinner table, does not deliver contempt as honesty, and doesn't require a defender to stand between themselves and their own child. Not because those parents are perfect, but because they understand at some level that child self-concept is being built in real time from the materials the environment provides. And they take that seriously. They understand that what they say to their child is not just feedback. It is literally constructing the internal structure from which that child will navigate the rest of their life. Your father did not understand that. Or maybe he understood it and could not override his own dysregulation. Or maybe he understood it and believed genuinely that toughness was the gift he was giving you. None of those explanations make what he said true. His words about you were generated by his emotional state, his own history, his own wounds, and his limitations, not by an accurate perception of who you were or who you are becoming. He was not a reliable narrator of your worth. He was a man with too much unprocessed pain and not enough tools, and you were the nearest available target. The cruelty felt personal because it was delivered personally, but it was not personal in the way he made it feel. It was not a clear-eyed assessment of your character. It was dysregulation looking for somewhere to land. You were not an idiot. You were a child in an environment that was too much for any child. And the difference between those two things means a lot. So you need to separate yourself from his verdict. How do you actually do this? How do you take a belief that was installed before you had language to question it and begin to dismantle it? Knowing intellectually that his words were not true is not the same as no longer feeling as though they are. That gap between what you know and what you feel is where the real work is done. The first step is understanding that the internal critic is not you. That voice, the one that sounds like clarity, the one that calls you an idiot when you make a mistake, that is not your authentic self-assessment. It is an internalized object, a psychological structure that is built from years of being in relationship with someone who spoke to you that way. It feels like your voice because it has been running long enough to feel native, but it moved in from outside, and what moved in can be examined, challenged, and over time, quieted, moved out. In Schema therapy, this work is called fighting the critic. Not arguing with every thought it produces, that is exhausting and it gives it too much power, but building a parallel voice, a voice that says, I hear you and I disagree, and then I'm going to proceed anyway. The second step is building what we might call an evidence base for your actual self, not the self he described, the self that has existed all along underneath his narrative, the self that has done things, built things, loved people, recovered from things, tried again after failing, experienced beauty, caused joy in others, learned, grown, changed. That self is not defective, that self is human. And there's a profound difference between defective and human, that his voice collapsed into a single verdict. The third step, and this one is slow, it cannot be rushed, it's grieving what you deserved and did not get. You deserved a father who knew how to tell you the truth without using it as a weapon, who could hold his high standards without making you feel like your existence was the problem, who could see your behavior clearly and still make you feel that you were loved exactly as you were. That father was possible, he just was not yours. And grieving that, really grieving it, not explaining it away, not minimizing it because he meant well, not protecting his image at the expense of your pain, that grief, when it is allowed to move through, it will create space for a different relationship with yourself. A relationship that is not organized around his verdict. Once again, you are not what he said. You were never what he said. You were a child trying to grow inside an environment that did not know how to hold you without breaking something. And the fact that you are here watching this, trying to understand what happened and what it cost you and how to move forward, that is not the behavior of someone defective. That is the behavior of someone with more courage than they have ever been given credit for. Your character is not fixed by what he decided it was. Character is something you work on consciously over a lifetime. Not because you're broken and need to be repaired, but because growth is what human beings do when they're finally free to do it on their own terms. You did not deserve the names, the blame. You did not deserve to be the place where his dysregulation landed. And you deserve now to build a relationship with yourself that starts from a different premise entirely. Not what is wrong with me that needs to be corrected, but who am I underneath everything I was told about myself? And what do I want to build from here? That question, asked with curiosity rather than dread, is where everything begins to change.